Well, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. A very warm welcome on behalf of the German Marshall Fund. My name is Corinna Hurst. I'm the Deputy Director and a Senior Fellow at the German Marshall Fund office in Brussels, Belgium. Very glad to be able to welcome all of you for today's event. Today's event is part of GMF series Cooperating in a Post-Pandemic World, Perspectives from Germany, which is funded through the Wunderbar Together USA 2020 project, an initiative funded by the German Federal Foreign Office and implemented by the Goethe Institute. And GMF is truly grateful for this partnership. I think you will all agree that today's topic, new work, new normal, how the pandemic shapes the future of work, affects all of us in one way or the other. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce two wonderful contributors to you, with whom I have the pleasure to shortly enter into a discussion. From Germany, Berlin, we are joined by Professor Dr. Jutta Allmendinger, President of the Berlin Social Science Center, as well as Professor at the Humboldt University, as well as Stephen Hill, journalist and political author, who is joining us this morning, his time from the United States. A very warm welcome. Just for all of you to know, so as a moderator, I will kick off the discussions with a couple of questions to both Jutta and Stephen for the first few minutes, and then I want to open it up to all of you to join us and ask questions or comment. In some ways, I would like to use this 45 minutes that we have to shed some light on the myriads of aspects that we have that are impacting our new normal, what it means for individuals, employers, but governments and society at large. But I hope we can also shed light and address some novel aspects that haven't been really sort of discussed so much. And so all of us can maybe capture a few key insights and take them with us. For those of you joining us and listening, please do use the Q&A function button to send in your contributions. I will try and weave in your comments throughout the conversation, but we'll also make definitely room for it at the end. Please share with us who you are, where you're joining us, and keep your questions and comments short, since I will have to multitask and moderate and listen as well as look for your comments. But yeah, I think we're off to a good start. And do also know that this event, this discussion is being recorded, so it will be made available afterwards. So let's start our conversation, and I think we all agree that a lot has been written now about this new normal that we are all in. We're all at least the three of us are now working from home. So if I could ask both of you, Jutta and Stephen, just to kick us off, briefly share with us, what's the current situation in Germany at the moment and in the United States? How are the public and the private sector responding to this sort of new situation? And maybe you can also briefly share with us a few differences and similarities that you see. You both are you're well aware of sort of what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic. So focus on your country, but maybe draw some comparison. And if I can ask Jutta for you to go first, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corinna. Hi, Stephen. I'm really glad to see you again. Thanks for having me. Well, I will first focus on Germany, if this is right, and then later we could come into an exchange and compare the German and the US situation. Now, in Germany, we have a huge discussion about the payment of system relevant or eminent jobs, if you want to put it like this. And this discussion is not over. This is first. Second, we have discussions on the increase of home office and whether or not we should have a legal right to home office. If we compare system relevant work to home office, we also see new cleavages in our workforce. Because before Corona, those people who were working at the workplace were considered to be the insiders, and those outside the workplace, the firm, whatever, outsiders. Now, this has turned around, and those with very safe, secure, well-paid jobs are at home, and those with less well-paid jobs with bad working times are working at home, at work, in hospitals, at schools, and wherever else in their eminent jobs. So this cleavage is something very, very new for Germany. And given that only 40% at the maximum of people can work at home, and the 60% are excluded in this very moment for having this option, this opportunity, we have to really discuss what this means and how the labor market should react to this in terms of whatever pay benefits and so on. The second topic which I want to mention is a huge discussion which actually I myself have initiated, and this is about the re-traditionalization of women. So whether or not this COVID had as one consequence that women are kept at home, that their contribution to care work even increased, and for this reason the gender care gap also increased. And as all of us know, if we have an increase in the gender care gap, of course we will also have an increase in life income and an increase in the differences of life income and an increase in the differences of pension money. So this is another huge discussion, and we probably can take this on and discuss the pros and cons and how I got this idea that this might be not very favorable for women in the medium and long term. Although very many women say that they enjoy the time they have with their children and their men, and that men indeed during the pandemic and during the lockdown increased their unpaid labor force participation. Along these lines, we are also, of course, discussing benefits of the pandemic, and the benefits no discussion about this, that we are much more open, and I mean this goes along all lines of education, on all lines of socio-economic background. It's the same for men as for women, for young as for old people. They are much more open now for digitalization. They actually really embrace digitalization as something positive, as something they had to learn, and say, so, well, I can learn this. And this is sort of an increase of self-efficacy, what they noticed about themselves during the pandemic. And the second point, which they consider to be a very positive momentum, is that the climate change and the all things, climate and traffic and transport goes in the right direction, so that nature is much more safe and behaved. So I would like to close with those 4 points which are in the center of the discussion in Germany right now.
Okay. Thank you so much. Lots of food for further discussions. Stephen, can I turn to you and ask you, what's the situation in the United States? And also, what are some of maybe the policy discussions already going on with the government, and maybe some of the new benefits, opportunities that people see?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me, Karina, and thank you for that very nice summation of what's going on in Germany, Professor Allmendinger. In the US, there's many similarities, of course. This is a global pandemic, and many countries are reacting similarly. A recent Stanford study found that about 42% of Americans now are working from their home office, which means their living room, their kitchen, their couch. This has some benefits. This has some real downsides, especially depending on how long this goes on. And looking at what the reaction of various businesses are and what they're saying they're going to do in the future, this trend is likely to continue, though not necessarily everybody just simply now working at home, but some will come into the office 2 days a week and then they'll work at home 2 or 3 days a week. There's going to be a mix. This is what the surveys of businesses, when they're asked, what are you going to do in the future? This is what they're saying. So, there could be some real opportunity here. The opportunity would be, for the jobs won't need to be located in cities anymore. So rural areas and suburb areas and areas that have a good university, that have a focus on science and math and engineering, suddenly can have remote work and don't have to be commuting into the cities. So, and as Jutta said, this could also be good for traffic and congestion ongoing, which would be good for climate change. It also could even be good for those countries that have been outsiders in labor markets. And already we're seeing more remote work from other countries that are, being hired by US employers. Again, that could be great for those countries. It could be also a challenge for US workers and German workers who are competing against people in Thailand, India, that is willing to do that same job for, a tenth of the wages. So this is another challenge. Some of the other challenges that we're seeing and that I think we'll continue to see is that this is an increase in what we typically have been called distributed workers. A distributed workforce is harder to organize for labor unions and to create collective bargaining agreements. And a distributed workforce lends itself more easily to the depersonalization of work and even the Uberization of work. More freelancers, more contractors, and initially they'll start out, companies will start out by just simply having their workers working at home. But once they're working at home, it becomes much easier to just have that job done by a freelancer. And so that means increases in bogus self-employment, as you call it in Germany. Here we call it misclassification of workers, and there's a big battle going on in California right now with Uber and Lyft, the ride-hailing companies, over misclassification of workers. So that's one alarming possibility. The other is we're seeing an increase in employer surveillance of at-home workers. So people in their homes who are being surveilled now, spied on by their employers using technology, having workers download certain software to their computers that monitors them all day long, monitors what they're typing, how they use their mouse. Some of them are requiring that they keep Zoom on all day long, and so they're always being watched. This is a rather alarming trend. There's really no laws around this. And now in Germany, of course, you have laws about this, and in the EU with the General Data Protection Regulation, but we're also seeing an increase in Germany and in the EU in this kind of spying of at-home workers. Companies that make this software say they have seen a tripling in the use of their software in Germany. So it's not clear that the businesses are actually obeying the laws that are there. They're just going forward with this new normal of at-home workers, and they're wondering, how do we preserve productivity? How do we make sure we know what these workers are doing? Well, let's just spy on them. Is this okay? We really have to ask ourselves this question. We're also seeing a dramatic change in the work-life balance, because now people are working at home and they never leave their jobs. And their children are at home, and suddenly it's a completely different situation in terms of that work-life balance. And can you turn off your computer? Can you turn off that Zoom and tell your employer, no, I'm not on the clock now, right? This is a big challenge that we have to think about. It's also, this work is lending itself to splitting work itself into more segmentation, smaller and smaller pieces of work, telling workers you have to be more flexible. You have to be ready to do whatever was asked of you from your home station. And once you start breaking work down into more segments like this, that's what allows it to be turned into more automation and more use of algorithms to do very select types of work. So will the algorithms be used to augment work or to replace workers? That's the big question there. Workplace safety and ergonomics. We've spent decades getting the laws to the point where workers have to have good stations at home, stations for their work, and now suddenly they're working from their couch with their laptops in their lap. Well, this is not good for your posture, for your how you work, and it's also led to some workers work for companies that are helping them to get a good home workstation, and other workers are left on their own to figure it out. And if they don't have their financial resources, do they have the ability to get the equipment they need to be able to do their work? This is going to affect the difference between the haves and the have-nots, because the haves will be able to create a better home workstation, and those who don't have so much will have a harder time doing that. So that's another challenge. Another challenge is potentially an undermining of the tax base of the welfare state, because as more workers we work remotely, especially as businesses start hiring workers from other countries. I mentioned earlier Thailand, India, and these sorts of countries. It's not clear that the government knows about this relationship. And so it's not clear that either the business or the worker, her or himself, is paying income tax and business taxes into the welfare state as they normally do for the employer-employee relationship. And as this trend grows, and as we're seeing that it's probably going to grow, this is a worry, because it could undermine the tax base that we need for things like education and transportation and energy, carbon reduction, national security, all these sorts of things. So there's certainly, if we put the right rules around this and we put the right regulations around it, I think there are a number of upsides and positives. But if we don't, there are many other worrying trends that could undermine several decades of carving out the social contract between employer and employee. That may go down the tubes rather quickly, actually.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's actually wonderful how both of you brought in the different players, whether it's the worker, the employers, or sort of the public sector. I mean, I guess there's no doubt that we really need to have a new look at work regulations, pay, taxes, safety, health standard, productivity, working hours, and it goes back to the trust. So my question is to both of you, sort of, who is in charge, or who can do what? How do you see the future of this discussion, where we bring the private sector, the public sector, the governments in, as well as the individual worker, sort of to forge a new social contract, as you say? And if I may add, I mean, we're talking about this huge impact that has really affected 40% of the society who are now working from home. But there's the other side who are still need to be out there, whether it's the care sector, the transportation sector, those working machineries. So the rest of the society, what does this sort of mean to them? And I leave it up to you which aspects you sort of want to address.
Well, as for the cleavages, your last point, between those people who are allowed to work at home and are able to work at home given the tasks they have to do, and those who have to stay at work. I mean, this cleavage I mentioned before, so I leave it to Stephen to further react to this. And in terms of who is in charge, I clearly see the government in charge, but also the unions and the employers, the employees as well, on different levels. As Stephen mentioned before, in terms of people surveillance, data protection, and so on, we clearly need European-wide rules, which in part we have. They did not have been well adapted to the present situation, which surprised us all, because we did not use Zoom before. But this was the most stable platform, and therefore all of us use it right now, knowing that there are problems behind it. So now now in reaction to the pandemic, we need entirely new rules. We also need rules, and this is a question of unions and employers, which they have to figure out about, well, I mean, at least, you know, some time regulations. So when, after which hour are you allowed to take off, you know, to just enjoy free time? Are you supposed to check your mails to be at reach over the weekend, for example, something like this? But also, I mean, should you have your camera on all the time in a very long Zoom meeting, or can you put it off? And what does this mean to the speaker? Things like this. So the Zoom etiquette, we also have to worry about. So it's not just the in and out. And I think one of the things we most have to worry about is, and this is something in addition to what Stephen has already said, that we very easily run into the problem of losing social trust. So when Robert Putnam said bowling alone, this is something which I take very, very seriously, because it was a work where people met from all different socio-economic strata. This does not mean that they talked in length to each other. That's not my point. But at least they saw how other people move, how other people behaved, that they went to work at time and things like this. And already seeing and watching those people decreased stereotypes, or actually did not allow stereotypes to grow. Now, we won't have this, at least for a huge amount of people. Right now in Germany, we estimate it's 45% or something like this. They are working at home. When they are going out, they are in the very close district of where they are living. And given that we have very segregated cities here as well as in the United States, you can imagine what's going to happen. It's a segregation of cities, the segregation of schools, the segregation whom I meet, who I even have the chance to meet, changes considerably. And just to give you one very little example, I have a little restaurant down in my house, and they say, well, and I asked them a couple of weeks ago, can I have a dinner tonight, which I usually always have? And he said, well, no, you have to make a reservation. I said, well, why do I have to make a reservation? Well, because all those people in this area where I live in Berlin now work at home, and they meet after work in this restaurant. But they are only meeting those people who are living in this particular district. So social closure becomes worse than it has been before. And this for me is a clearly exclamation mark, saying, well, we have to look for co-working spaces so that people, yes, they do not have to travel into Los Angeles or San Francisco or to the inner city of Berlin or whatever, but they have to at least move out of their office to be able, and to be forced, I should say, to meet people different from themselves. We lost the big religions, we lost the big parties, we lost military service as rooms where you could meet people different from you. We cannot afford losing the work as well.
Yeah. Before I let Stephen talk, could I follow up on this? Because I agree with you that work was also very much a social space that allowed for diverse people to come together. Can you, also given your work, see already, are there new places where this maybe can substitute the workplace? Do you see?
Well, Stephen Hill knows the social science center Berlin, and he knows that we had office after office lined up, and really not a lot of meeting spaces. So we are now going to rebuild it to give them the option to, or actually force them to come in from time to time to discuss their work, because we see that there is no decrease in the quantity of academic papers, no decrease at all. But we wonder whether the work is as innovative, as creative as it has been before, and whether or not, you know, people still form something we have been very proud of, you know, something like the social science culture or the pride, you know, to being part of the community of people working for this wonderful institution.
Yeah. Do you see sports clubs or religious communities getting a new role in this, bringing people together again, or?
Yeah, but sport clubs, you know, they are usually organized on a very district sort of level as well. There are the ballet schools and things like this. No, I'm really looking forward that organizations get together and sort of go into those co-working spaces about which Stephen Hill knows a lot. This would be the best substitute. And of course, we also need to have, like in the US, I learned that you have this Zoomers to boomers, sort of new, whatever, grassroots development, which is on the social data. We don't have this. I mean, we have to develop this as well, so that we have at least some links in the civil society helping themselves and not trusting on employers or on union representatives.
Okay, thank you. Stephen, sorry for keeping you waiting, but I wanted to sort of dig a bit deeper. But sort of, who do you see sort of driving, you know, participating in these future dialogues that we need about what do new work regulations look like? And you mentioned the sort of freelancers and contractors who are not really part of unions. So how can we make sure that their rights are being respected as the public and private sector may be forging new regulations?
Well, in the United States, the conversations are happening at many different levels. So at the political level, there's, you know, the politicians and such, but at the cultural level, you know, we become a very divided country, even over whether to wear masks or not, and social distancing, and the whole reaction to the coronavirus. In fact, Jutta, just the other day, I was thinking about your work in this area of social mixing and how it's being so impacted in the United States. Not only schools, so, you know, some of the private schools are bringing back small pods of students, but the public schools in many states are still at home. And so, I mean, schools have been one of the greatest social mixing institutions for many, many decades in the United States. And this has been severely impacted. You know, people are now ordering to get their groceries and delivered by Amazon, so they're not going to the grocery stores as much anymore, and then working at home as well. So in so many ways, the institutions that we have counted on for this type of social mixing are being impacted, and I don't see anyone in the United States really talking about this. We need to bring Jutta back over here to help us jumpstart this conversation, because you can stay at the Thomas Mann house again, Jutta. And
very kind.
Yeah. And so this is a big, huge challenge that we face, is not just any type of legislation, but even the conversation, and to make sure that happens. And of course, much of this will be impacted by the presidential election on November 3rd, and depending on who gets elected, because if Donald Trump gets reelected, and you know, it's really, I can't tell you right now who's going to win, despite what you see in the polls. Their administration isn't talking or thinking or even care seemingly about any of these issues. So I think in the United States, we'll see more action probably at the state level, and to some degree, even at the local level in some of the bigger, more progressive cities, where they'll maybe start trying to tackle some of this. I mean, on the positive side, at the city level here in San Francisco, we've seen more attempts to close more streets and encourage more bicycling, encourage more people to walk around the city, and to use the parks, and to use the beaches and things like this. But you know, when it comes to the world of work, many people have moved out of San Francisco. It's kind of strange. The rents are actually coming down for housing and things like this because so many people have moved out of the city. You see many big moving trucks with people loading it up and moving to suburbs, moving even further to the north. But of course, as they move further north, they're encountering wildfires and suddenly realizing, this isn't what we had in mind. Maybe San Francisco doesn't look so bad. So it's really too early to say how all of this will shake out.
Yeah.
In terms of policy, we really aren't seeing any suggestions for new laws yet. The current laws around privacy and data actually go back to 1986 when the telephone was the big technology. So that's how outdated the laws are around all of these things. And in the middle of a presidential election, there's no momentum around any of these sorts of things at all. So
yeah, no, thank you sort of for also bringing in the state and the local level. I think they do actually play quite an instrumental role. And because you mentioned, people moving out of the city here in Brussels, there have also been streets or parks closed for traffic, and it actually has brought the motorists, the car owners together in new ways than ever before. So I think there are also opportunities for new communities, but it's early to tell. We have another 15 sort of minutes, but so I again wanted to encourage our listeners to send in their questions. And I do have one that is picking up on something, Jutta, you mentioned earlier on related to gender roles. And David from France is asking the question, can we also expect this new normal to maybe close the gender gap a bit more? Bringing the onus on men and fathers who, decide that they do want to take up a bigger role at home with the children, show up late to work because they take their care responsibilities seriously. So use this opportunity to put their agenda sort of first. So I don't know, Jutta, if you want to chime in first, but Stephen, I'd be interested to also hear the US perspective.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for this question from France, which is far ahead of Germany in this dimension, probably not just in this one, on gender equality in general. Well, in Germany, we indeed saw an increase of men taking care of their children. That's true at an aggregate level. If you look in which households this particularly happened, then the statistics are very, very clear. It happened then when women worked outside the home, being in system-relevant occupation, and men were on short labor or had the opportunity to work at home, because then you could not negotiate anymore, though men had to do this and men did it. And they actually also enjoyed. So I have surveys which show that men enjoyed to work with the children for school or for whatever, spend time with them. What we do see now is given that we do not have this lockdown anymore, that life is not back to normal. No way, of course not. But men now go back to work again, and women are left over with their children. And we do not see a long-term effect of this. And this is very close to what shows the literature. The literature shows that if men in the past moved from full-time to part-time because they lost full-time work, they took on more care work. But in the very moment they went back to full-time work, they decreased their care work immediately. And so we do not expect a lasting sort of closure of this gender care gap at all. At best, it stays as it has been before. But I worry that it's increasing, actually.
Okay. Stephen, what are your observations from the US?
Well, I've seen no data about this, so it's not being tracked accurately, it seems. But anecdotally, we do see many more men who are now working at home. I hear stories of them, helping out at home more. But whether this will be a long-term trend, it's really hard to say. The other factor I think involved here is that for many of the essential workers, service sector workers, healthcare workers, they're disproportionately women. And so many women are still working out of the home as they were before, and their husbands are at home having to pick up some of the slack. So we can hope that this continues, but I think as Jutta said, the data shows if things sort of go back to normal, if we ever get back to that, even with the new normal, it's hard to know if men will continue to do this kind of work. It's I think we'll have to see.
Kind of disheartening to see both of you not really trusting in the men, I guess. So let's do a bit of a shout out. I hope that.
Well, I mean, sorry for interrupting, Corinna, but there are measures which can be taken to increase the time men spend with their children. Just look at parental leave. In the very moment, we took 2 months for men only. The number of men taking time out to take care of their children increased tremendously. They're now on average taking 3 months off. So we could simply increase it, as France has it, as other Scandinavian countries have it, from 2 months to X months, to 4 months, for example. And this would help, and probably spending more and longer time with children would mean that they stay with it, or even when they are then back at work.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I second that. Policy could play a big role here in encouraging this kind of thing. I mean, some of the other policies that I think we need to look to, and hopefully Germany will be a leader in this, is for the many workers who are staying at home, and right now they're working under job contracts. But as I said, the expectation is that over time, employers will switch more and more to hiring freelancers. Mm-hmm. And so as they do that, freelancers, of course, don't have nearly the coverage of labor laws and things like safety nets, to help them and help their families. So I think having things like a portable safety net, so that no matter which business you work for, every business must pay into a kind of security account for you that you then use as a worker to pay into the welfare system, so you can pay your half and the employer's half of things like healthcare and other parts of the welfare system. Because right now in Germany, as in the United States, pretty much everywhere in the world, if you're a freelancer, you have to pay the employer's half of the welfare contributions into the system, as well as your own half. And that's a big burden for those workers. In Germany, you do have the system, the KSK, in which the employer's half is paid for journalists and for artists and musicians and these sorts of things. This kind of system should be extended for all types of workers. In the US, we are having some conversations about this, and even companies like Uber are saying, okay, we need to have some sort of portable safety net like this for our drivers. So that conversation needs to deepen real fast and needs to ramp up in terms of policy and legislation, because this is the future of the workforce, is more and more people working for multiple businesses, multiple employers, that will cause problems if they don't have the safety net that they need.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to, we only have a few minutes left, so I just want to throw out this question that actually came from 2 people, from a Martin as well as Adriana here at the European Parliament in Brussels. What, with this new environment, what happens to the organizational culture or the corporate culture and the social bonds between employees in this new normal? Maybe both of you, as sort of final remarks, can address this.
Well, it's a social culture and the organizational culture is really at risk. I can even say this for academic institutions, where it should be much easier to keep an institutional culture and organizational culture compared to other firms and enterprises. We did all our very, very best to bring all those people together for further training. It was very, very successful over the last couple of years, I have to say. Now, it sort of breaks down, and this has something to do with different options to different people, and it has nothing to do with the option not to travel. I mean, it's much this everybody would understand. If the academics, would stop traveling to see Stephen Hill in person, San Francisco, spending with him one wonderful day, this we won't do anymore. I hope. I really hope that this is a lasting thing. But that we spend voluntarily, time with those people who can't work at home. Probably because they don't have the space at home, but primarily because they have work which cannot be transported and not be done at home. This is something which I have to regulate. I have to put it so bluntly. And this, of course, is taking rights of employees in one way or the other. And for this reason, Mr. Heil, who is the Minister of Labor and Social Affairs, he is now coming up with a legislation thinking about 2 days per month, but the real world is much, much further than this. I mean, they are taking out 2 weeks or 3 weeks per month. And of course, people sitting at the Social Science Institute are sort of envious. They do not know whether they really work and things like this. So stereotyping at its best.
Yeah, thanks. Stephen, in 1 minute, I hope our system will not cut you off, but we are very close to the end of our session, so.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said, I mean, our society has progressed for decades in creating these amazing institutions like Wissenschaftszentrum and New America, where I used to work, and others, and people came together and created this synergy and innovation and a culture. And that's really in question right now. Can a culture retain itself by everyone working remotely? I have my doubts. I mean, what will replace it? That's the big question. And I don't think anybody really knows right now. Will there be these online communities? Well, will we all be using Facebook? I mean, Facebook is notorious for its like Facebook groups in which that's where the militias and the far right are using to organize and strategize. They're using it very effectively in the United States. So will other groups start using it effectively to organize and strategize and to create their own sense of culture? I hope we could do it without relying on Facebook, since I don't think it's a reliable company and doesn't have the right values for playing that central role as the infrastructure for how people connect. But these are very very troubling questions. And I want to emphasize that there is opportunity here, but it's going to take the right rules and regulations to put around it. I'm not sure we're going to see the leadership for that coming from the United States. The leadership for that in the United States is being taken by Silicon Valley. And so I'm looking towards Germany and the EU and people like Margaret Vestager and the Germans to take the lead on this and help us to figure out how to preserve the social contract that we need.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for your insights and sort of perspectives. I mean, in some ways, Steve, I want to stick with this positive note that you mentioned in terms of there are also opportunities in this new normal we are in. And I think it is up to the individuals, but the corporate sector as large, as well as the public sector and society, to come up with these new ways of how do we live in this. And so I'm kind of hoping that everybody will have his or her role. Thank you so much for joining us. Also a big thank you to the audience, and I look forward to seeing all of you in one way or the other in real life or in the virtual world.
Thank you, Corinna. Thank you. Hi, Steve. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you, Jutta. Thank you, all my German friends. Good to see you again.